Welcome back to A Clock in the Journal. There comes a moment in every trade when the hands move without hesitation, the tools are familiar, the risks are measured, and experience speaks louder than caution. Tonight we return once more to the Blue Gate. The tables are the same. The dim lamps burn low. The quiet conversations continue beneath the smoke and shadow. But here we meet men who are no longer apprentices. They have learned the trade. They understand the streets. They know when to move and when to wait. This is the moment every professional hopes for, when skill, reputation, and opportunity meet. The height of the game. And in such moments, confidence can become a dangerous companion. Chapter 11, Stephen's Tale. I had never seen either of the partners in the firm of Viney and Marr, as I may have said already. On the day after the man was stabbed at our side door, I saw them both. That morning, the tide was low, and hole-in-the-wall stairs ended in a causeway in the midst of a little flat of gravel and mud. So, since the mud was nowhere dangerous, and there was no deep water to fall into, I was allowed to go down the steps alone and play on the foreshore while Grandfather Nat was busy with his morning's affairs, the 2 or 3 watermen lying by the causeway undertaking to keep an eye on me. And there I took my pleasure as I would, now raking in the wet pebbles and heaving over big stones that often pulled me on to all fours, now climbing the stairs to peep along the alley, and once or twice running as far as the bar parlor door to report myself to Grandfather Nat and inform him of my discoveries. The little patch of foreshore soon rendered up all its secrets, and its area grew less by reason of the rising tide, so that I turned to other matters of interest. Out in midstream a cluster of lighters lay moored, waiting for the turn of the tide. Presently a little tug came puffing and fussing from somewhere along shore, and after much shoving and hauling and shouting, scuffled off, trailing 3 of the lighters behind it, from which I conjectured that their loads were needed in a hurry. But the disturbance among the rest of the lighters was not done with when the tug had cleared the 3 from their midst, for a hawser had got foul of a rudder, and 2 or 3 men were at work with poles and hooks, recrimination and forcible words, to get things clear, though the thing seemed no easy job, and it took my attention for some time. But presently I tired of it, and climbed the steps to read the bills, describing the people who had been found drowned. There were 11 of the bills altogether, fresh and clean, and fragments of innumerable others, older and dirtier, were round about them. 10 men and 1 woman had been picked up, it would seem, and all within a week or 2, as I learned when I had spelled out the dates. I pored at these bills till I had read them through, being horribly fascinated by the personal marks and peculiarities so baldly set forth. The scars, the tattoo marks, the color of the dead eyes, the clothes and boots, and the contents of the pockets, though indeed most of the pockets would seem to have been empty. The woman, they guessed her age at 22, wore 1 earring, and I entangled myself in conjectures as to what had become of the other. I was disturbed by a shout from the causeway. I looked and saw Bill Stagg in his boat. "Is your grandfather there?" shouted Bill Stagg. "Tell him they've found his boat." This was joyful news, and I rushed to carry it. "They've found our boat, Grandfather Nat," I cried. "Bill Stagg says so." Grandfather Nat was busy in the bar, and he received the information with calmness. "Ah," he said, "I knew it. 'Ud turn up somewhere. Bill Stagg there?" And he came out leisurely in his shirt sleeves and stood at the head of the stairs. "Pliss Galley found your boat, Cap'n," Bill Stagg reported. "You'll have to go up to the float for it." "Right. Know where it was?" "Up agin Elephant Stairs." Bill Stagg pointed across the river, turned adrift, and jammed among the lighters. Grandfather Nat nodded serenely. Bill Stagg nodded in reply, shoved off from the causeway, and went about his business. The hawser was still foul among the lighters out in the stream, and a man had pulled over in a boat to help. I had told Grandfather of the difficulty, and how long it had baffled the lightermen, and was asking the third of a string of questions about it all, when there was a step behind and a voice. "Good mornin', Cap'n Nat." My grandfather turned quickly. "Mr. Viney," he said. "Well, good mornin'." I turned also, and I was not prepossessed by Mr. Viney. His face, a face no doubt originally pale and pasty, but too long sunburned to revert to anything but yellow in these later years of shore life. His yellow face was ever stretched in an uneasy grin, a grin that might mean either propitiation or malice, and remained the same for both. He had the watery eyes and the goatee beard that were not uncommon among seamen, and in total I thought he much resembled one of those same hangdog fellows that stood at corners and leaned on posts in the neighborhood, making a mysterious living out of sailors. One of them, that is to say, in a superior suit of clothes that seemed too good for him. I suppose he may have been an inch taller than Grandfather Nat, but in the contrast between them he seemed very small and mean. He offered his hand with a stealthy gesture, rather as though he were trying to pick my grandfather's waistcoat pocket, so that the old man stared at the hand for a moment, as if to see what he would be at, before he shook it. "Down in the world again, Cap'n Nat," said Viney with a shrug. "Aye, I heard," answered Captain Nat. "I'm very sorry, but perhaps you'll be up again soon." "I come to ask you about something," Viney proceeded, as they walked away toward the bar-parlor door. "Something you'll tell me, bein' an old shipmate, if you can find out, I'm sure. Can we go into your place?" "No, there's a woman there." "Only one as does washin'." "Up an' such. I'll send her upstairs if you like." "No, out here's best. We'll walk up and down. People get hangin', round doors an' keyholes in a place like that. Here we can see who's near us." "What? Secrets?" "Aye." Viney gave an ugly twist to his grin. "I know some o' yours. One big un, at any rate, Cap'n Nat, don't I? So I can afford to let you into a little mine, seeing I can't help it. Now I'd like to know if you've seen anything of Mar." "No. Haven't seen him for months. Bolted, they tell me, and, well, you know better'n me, I expect." "I don't know," Viney replied with emphasis. "I ought to know, but I don't. See here now. Less than a week ago he cleared out, and then I filed my petition. He might'a been gone anywhere. Bolted. Might be abroad, as would seem most likely. In plain fact, he was only coming down in these parts to lie low. See? Round about here a man can lie low and news, snug and news, safer than abroad, if he likes. And he had money with him. All we could get together. See?" And Viney frowned and winked and glanced stealthily over his shoulder. "Ah," remarked Captain Nat dryly. "I see. And the creditors. Damn the creditors. See here, Cap'n Nat Kemp. Remember a man called Dan Webb?" Captain Nat paled a little and tightened his lips. "Remember a man called Dan Webb?" Viney repeated, stopping in his walk and facing the other with the uneasy grin unchanged. "A man called Dan Webb, aboard O, the Florence along O, you and me. 'Cause I do, anyhow. That's only my little hint. We're good friends altogether, course, Cap'n Nat. But you know what it means. Well, Mar had money with him, as I said. He was to come to a quiet anchorage hereabout. Got up like a seaman, and let me know at once." Captain Nat, his mouth still set tight, nodded with a grunt. "Well, he didn't let me know. I heard nothing at all from him, and it struck me rather of a heap to think that perhaps he'd put the double on me, and cleared out in good earnest. But yesterday I got news. A blind fiddler chap gave me some sort of news." Captain Nat remembered the meeting at the street corner in the evening after the funeral. "Blind George?" he queried. "Yes, that was all the name he gave me. A regular thick un, that blind chap in. A flow-o language as would curl the sheathing off a ship's bottom. He came the evening before, it seems, but found the place shut up. Servant gal took her hook. Well now, he'd done all but see Mar down here at the Blue Gate. He'd seen him as clear as a blind man could, he said with his ears, and he came to me to give me the tip and earn anything I'd give him for it. It amounted to this. It was plain enough Mar had come along here all right and pitched on some sort of quarters, but it was clear he wasn't fit to be trusted alone in such a place at all. For the blind chap found him drunk and in tow with as precious a pair o' bully boys as Blue Gate could show. Not only drunk, neither, but drunk with a slack jaw, drunk iron, gabbling, drunk iron talkin', business, my business, and lettin' out all there was to let, this an, that an, t'other an, Lord knows what. It was only because of his drunken jabber that the blind man found out who he was. And this was the day before yesterday? Asked Captain Nat. Yes. Captain Nat shook his head. If he was like that the day before yesterday, he said, in tow with such chaps as you say, well, whatever he had on him ain't on him now, and it'd puzzle a cleverer man than me to find it. You may lay to that. Viney swore and stamped a foot and swore again. But see, he said, ain't there a chance? It was in notes, all of it. Them chaps'll be afraid to pass notes. Couldn't most of it be got back on an arrangement to cash the rest? You can find 'em if you try, with all your chances. Come, I'll pay fair for what I get, to you and all. See how you've left it? Remarked Captain Nat, and Viney swore again. This was all done the day before yesterday. Well, you don't hear of it yourself till yesterday, and now you don't come to me till today. Viney swore once more, and grinned twice as wide in his rage. Yes, he said, that was Blind George's doin'. I sent him back to see what he could do, and ain't seen him since. Like as not, he's standing in with the others. Aye, that's likely, the old man answered. Very likely. Blind George is as tough a lot as any in Blue Gate, for all he's blind. You'd never heard of it at all if they'd greased him a bit at first. I expect they shut him out to keep the plant to themselves, and so he came to you for anything he could pick up. And now... Viney cursed them all, and Blind George and himself together, but most he cursed Mar, and so talking, the two men walked to and fro in the passage. I could see that Viney was angry, and growing angrier still. But I gave all my attention to the work at the fouled hawser. The man in the boat, working patiently with a boat-hook, succeeded suddenly and without warning, so that he almost pitched headlong into the river. The rope came up from its entanglement with a spring and a splash, flinging some amazing great object up with it, half out of water, and the men gave a cry as this thing lapsed heavily to the surface. The man in the boat snatched his hook again and reached for the thing as it floated. Somebody threw him a length of line, and with this he made it fast to his boat, and began pulling toward the stairs, towing it. I was puzzled to guess what the object might be. It was no part of the lighter's rudder, for it lay in, rather than on, the water, and it rolled and wallowed, and seemed to tug heavily, so that the boatman had to pull his best. I wondered if he had caught some curious water creature, a porpoise perhaps, or a seal, such as had been flung ashore in a winter storm at Blackwall a year before. Viney and Grandfather Nat had turned their steps toward the stairs, and as they neared, my grandfather, lifting his eyes, saw the boatman and his prize, and saw the watermen leaving their boats for the foreshore. With a quick word to Viney, he hastened down the stairs, and Viney himself, less interested, followed halfway down and waited. The boatman brought up alongside the foreshore, and he and another hauled at the tow rope. The thing in the water came in, rolling and bobbing, growing more hideously distinct as it came. It checked at the mud and stones, turned over, and with another pull lay ashore, staring and gray and streaming. A dead man. The lips were pulled tight over the teeth, and, the hair being fair, it was the plainer to see that one side of the head and forehead was black and open with a great wound. The limbs lay limp and tumbled, all, but one leg fell aside with so loose a twist that plainly it was broken, and I heard, afterwards, that it was the leg that had caused the difficulty with the hawser. Grandfather Nat, down at the waterside, had no sooner caught sight of the dead face than with wide eyes he turned to Viney and shouted the one word, "Look!" Then he went and took another view, longer and closer, and straightway came back in 6 strides to the stairs, whereon Viney was no longer standing, but sitting, his face tallowy and his grin faded. "See him?" cried Grandfather Nat in a hushed voice. "See him? It's Mar himself, if I know him at all. Come and see." Viney pulled his arm from the old man's grasp, turned, and crawled up a stair or two. "No," he said faintly, I won't now. They'd know me perhaps, some of them." His breath was short, and he gulped. "Good God," he said presently, "it's him. It's him sure enough. And the clothes he had on. But, Captain Nat, go on. Try his pockets. Go on. There's a pocketbook, leather pocketbook. Go on." "What's the good?" asked Captain Nat, with a lift of the eyebrows and the same low voice. "What's the good?" "I can't fetch it away, with all them witnesses. Go yourself and say you're his partner. You'd have a chance then." No, it ain't good enough. You know him. I don't. I'll stand in with you. Give you 100 if it's all there. Square 'em. You know 'em. If they're to be squared, you can do it as well as me. There'll be an inquest on this, and evidence. I ain't going to be asked what I did with the man's pocketbook. No, I don't meddle in this, Mr. Viney. If it ain't good enough for you to get it for yourself, it ain't good enough for me to get it for you. Kemp, I'll go you halves. There. Get it, and there's 400 for you. 800 and odd quid in a pocketbook. Come, that's worth it, ain't it? 800 and odd quid in a leather pocketbook. And I'll go you halves. Captain Nat started at the words and stood for a moment staring. 800, he repeated under his breath. 800 and odd quid in a leather pocketbook. Ah! And the stare persisted and grew thoughtful. "Yes," replied Viney, now a little more himself. "Now you know. And it's worth it, ain't it? Don't waste time. They're turning him over themselves. You can manage all these chaps. Go on." "I'll see if anything's there," answered Captain Nat. "More I can't. And if there's nothing, that's an end of it." He went down to where the men were bending over the body, to disengage the tow line. He looked again at the drawn face under the gaping forehead, and said something to the men. Then he bent and patted the sodden clothes, now here, now there, and at last felt in the breast pocket. Meantime, Viney stood feverishly on the stairs, watching, fidgeting nervously down a step, and then down another, and then down 2 more. And so till Captain Nat returned. The old man shook his head. "Cleaned out," he reported. "Cleaned out, o' course. Hit on the head and cleaned out, like many a score better men before him. Down these parts, not a thing in the pockets anywhere. Flimped clean." Viney's eyes were wild. "Nothing at all left?" he said. "Nothing of his own? Not a watch, nor anything?" "No, not a watch, nor anything." Viney stood staring at space for some moments, murmuring many oaths. Then he asked suddenly, "Where's this blind chap? Where can I find Blind George?" Grandfather Nat shook his head. "He's all over the neighborhood," he answered. "Try the highway. I can't give you nearer than that." And with no more counsel to help him, Mr. Viney was fain to depart. He went grinning and cursing up the passage, and so toward the bridge, without another word or look. And when I turned to my grandfather, I saw him staring fixedly at me, lost in thought, and rubbing his hand up in his hair behind, through the gray and out at the brown on top. Chapter 12. In the clubroom, by the side of the bills stuck at the corner of hole-in-the-wall stairs, the bills that had so fascinated Stephen, a new one appeared, with the heading, "Body Found." It particularized the personal marks and description of the unhappy Marr: his fresh complexion, his brown hair, his serge suit, and his ankle jacks. The bill might have stood on every wall in London till it rotted, and never have given a soul who knew him a hint to guess the body his, except Viney, who knew the fact already, and the body might have been buried unidentified ere Viney would have shown himself in the business, were it not for the interference of Mr. Cripps. For industry of an unprofitable kind was a piece of Mr. Cripps's nature, and moreover, he was so regular a visitor at the mortuary as to have grown an old friend of the keeper. His persistent prying among the ghastly liars in state, at first on plea of identifying a friend, a contingency likely enough, since his longshore acquaintance was wide, and later under the name of friendly calls, was an indulgence that had helped him to consideration as a newsmonger, and twice had raised him to the elevation of witness at an inquest, a distinction very gratifying to his simple vanity. He entertained high hopes of being called witness in the case of the man stabbed at the side door of the hole in the wall, and was scarce seen at Captain Nat's all the next day, preferring to frequent the mortuary. So it happened that he saw the other corpse that was carried thence from hole-in-the-wall stairs. "There y' are," said the mortuary keeper. "There's a fresh just in from the river, unknown. You don't know I am either, I expect." But Mr. Cripps was quite sure that he did. Curious and eager, he walked up between the two dead men, his grimy little body being all that divided them in this their grisly reunion. "I do know I am," he insisted thoughtfully. "Leastways I've seen I am somewheres, I'm sure." The little man gazed at the dreadful head, and then at the rafters, then shut his eyes with a squeeze that drove his nose into amazing lumps and wrinkles, then looked at the head again, and squeezed his eyelids together once more, and at last started back, his eyes rivaling his very nose itself for prominence. "Why," he gasped, It is, s'elp me. It's Mr. Marr, as is partners with Mr. Viney. I only see I am once in my life, but I'll swear it's I am. Lord, what a phenomenal go!" And with that, Mr. Cripps rushed off incontinent to spread the news wherever anybody would listen. He told the police, he told the loafers, he told Captain Nat and everybody in his bar, he told the watermen at the stairs, he shouted it to the pearlmen in their boats, and he wriggled into conversation with perfect strangers to tell them too. So that it came to pass that Viney, being called upon by the coroner's officer, was fain to swallow his reluctance and come forward at the inquest. That was held at the hole in the wall 24 hours after the body had been hauled ashore. The two inquests were held together, in fact, Marr's and that of the broken-nosed man, stabbed in the passage. 2 inquests, or even 3, in a day, made no uncommon event in those parts, where perhaps a dozen might be held in a week, mostly ending with the same doubtful verdict, found drowned. But here one of the inquiries related to an open and witnessed murder, and that fact gave some touch of added interest to the proceedings. Accordingly, a drifting group hung about the doors of the hole in the wall at the appointed time, just such an idle, changing group as had hung there all the evening after the man had been stabbed, and in the midst stood Blind George with his fiddle, his vacant white eye rolling upward, his mouth full of noisy ribaldry, and his fiddle playing punctuation and chorus to all he said or sang. He turned his ear at the sound of many footsteps leaving the door near him. "There they go," he sang out. "There they go, 12 on 'em." And indeed it was the jury going off to view the bodies. "There they go, 12 good men, and true, and bloomin'. Proud they are to fancy it. Got a copper for Blind George, gentlemen? Not a brown for poor George? Not them. Not a brass farden among the old damn good and lawful lot. Ahoy! Ain't Gubbins there? The good and lawful pork butcher as, add to pay 40 bob for Chauvin, a lump o' fat under the scales. Tell the crowner to mind his pockets." The idlers laughed, and one flung a copper, which Blind George snatched almost before it had fallen. "Ha-ha!" he cried. "There's a toff somewhere near. I can tell by the sound of his money. Here goes for a stave!" And straightway be broke into. Oh, they call me Hanging Johnny, with my hang boys, hang. The mortuary stood at no great distance, and soon the jury were back in the clubroom over the bar and at work on the first case. The police had had some difficulty as to identification of the stabbed man. The difficulty arose not only because there were no relations in the neighborhood to feel the loss, but as much because the persons able to make the identification kept the most distant possible terms with the police and withheld information from them as a matter of principle, albeit a reluctant ruffian was laid hold of, who was induced sulkily to admit that he had known the deceased to speak to, and lodged near him in Blue Gate, that the deceased was called Bob Kipps, that he was quite lately come into the neighborhood, and that he had no particular occupation, as far as witness knew. It needed some pressure to extract the information that Kipps, during the short time he was in Blue Gate, chiefly consorted with one Dan Ogle, and that witness had seen nothing of Ogle that day, nor the day before. There was also a woman called to identify, a woman more reluctant than the man, a woman of coarse features, dull eyes, tousled hair, and thick voice, sluttish with rusty finery. Name, Margaret Flynn, though at the back of the little crowd that had squeezed into the court she was called Muskie Mag. It was said there, too, that Mag, in no degree one of the fainting sort, had nevertheless swooned when taken into the mortuary, gone clean off with a flop. True, she explained it afterward by saying that she had only expected to see one body, but found herself brought face to face with two, and of course there was the other there, Mars. But it was held no such odds between one corpse and two that an outer and outer like Mag should go on the faint over it. This was reasonable enough for the crowd, but not for a woman who had sat to drink with three men, and in a short hour or so had fallen over the battered corpse of one of them in the dark of her room, who had been forced now to view the rent body of a second, and in doing it to meet once again the other, resurrected, bruised, sodden, and horrible, and who knew that all was the work of the last of the three, and that man in peril of the rope, the man, too, of all the world in her eye. Her evidence, given with plain anxiety and a nervous unsteadiness of the mouth, added nothing to the tale. The man was Bob Kipps. He was a stranger till lately. Came, she had heard tell, from Shoreditch or Hoxton, saw him last a day or two ago, knew nothing of his death beyond what she had heard, did not know where Dan Ogle was, this very vehemently with much shaking of the head, had not seen him with deceased. But here the police inspector handed the coroner a scribbled note, and the coroner, having read it and passed it back, said no more. Muskie Mag stood aside, while the inspector tore the note into small pieces and put the pieces in his pocket. Nathaniel Kemp, landlord of the house, told the story of the murder as he saw it, and of his chase of the murderer. Did not know deceased, and should be unable to identify the murderer if he met him again, having seen no more than his figure in the dark. All this time Mr. Cripps had been standing in eager trepidation foremost among the little crowd, nodding and lifting his hand anxiously, strenuous to catch the coroner's officer's attention at the dismissal of each witness, and fearful lest his offer of evidence made a dozen times before the coroner came should be forgotten. Now at last the coroner's officer condescended to notice him, and being beckoned, Mr. Cripps swaggered forward, his greasy wide wake crushed under his arm, and his face radiant with delighted importance. He bowed to the coroner, kissed the book with a flourish, and glanced round the court to judge how much of the due impression was yet visible. The coroner signified that he was ready to hear whatever Mr. Cripps knew of this matter. Mr. Cripps threw a chest, stuck an arm akimbo, and raised the other with an oratorical sweep so large that his small voice, when it came, seemed all the smaller. "I was in the bar, sir," he piped. "The bar, sir, of this, oos has been long acquainted with an, much respectin, Cap'n Kemp, an, in the habit of visitin, ere in the intervals of the pursuit of my heart, I was in the bar, sir, when my attention was attracted by a sudden noise behind, or, as I may say, in the rear of, the bar parlor. I was able to distinguish, gentlemen of the jury, what might be called, in a common way speakin', a bump or a bang, such as would be occasioned by an unknown murderer criminally shoving his unhappy victims agin the back door of a publican's house. I was able to distinguish it, sir, from a human cry which followed. A human cry, or as it might be a holler, such as would be occasioned by the unhappy victim of e'en his head shoved agin the back door aforesaid. Gentlemen, I hesitated not a moment. I rushed forward. Mr. Cripps paused so long to give the statement effect that the coroner lost patience. "Yes," he said. "You rushed forward. Do you mean you jumped over the bar?" For a moment Mr. Cripps's countenance fell. Truly, it would have been more imposing to have jumped over the bar. But he was on his oath, and he must do his best with the facts. "No, sir," he explained a little tamely. "Not over the bar, but rather the opposite way, so to speak, towards the door. I rushed forward, gentlemen, in a sort of rearwards direction, through the door, and round into the alley. Immediate as I turned the corner, gentlemen, I beheld with my own eyes the unknown murderer. I am arisen from over his unhappy victim, and I see as the criminal tragedy had transpired. I rushed forward." The sensation he looked for being slow in coming, another rush seemed expedient, but it fell flat as the first, and Mr. Cripps struggled on, desperately conscious that he had nothing else to say. "I rushed forward, sir, seeing which the miscreant absconded, no doubt, with the proceeds, and seeing Cap'n Kemp abscondin' after him, I turned and beheld the unhappy victim, the corpse now in custody, sir, a-layin' in the bar parlor, helpless and decimated. I rushed forward. It was sad to see how little the coroner was impressed. There was even something in his face not unlike a smile, and Mr. Cripps was at the end of his resources. But if he could have seen the face of Muskie Mag, in the little crowd behind him, he might have been consoled. She alone, of all who heard, had followed his rhetoric with an agony of attention, word by word, even as she had followed the earlier evidence. Now her strained face was the easier, merely by contrast with itself, when Mr. Cripps was in full cry, and a moment later it was tenser than ever. Yes, Mr. Cripps," the coroner said. "No doubt you were very active, but we don't seem to have increased the evidence. You say you saw the man who stabbed the deceased in the passage. Did you know him at all? Ever see him before?" Here, mayhap, was some chance of an effect after all. Mr. Cripps could scarce have distinguished the murderer from one of the posts in the alley, but he said with all the significance he could give the words, "Well, sir, I won't go so far as to swear to his name, sir. No, sir, not to his name, certainly not." And therewith he made his sensation at last, bringing upon himself the 24 eyes of the jury altogether. The coroner looked up sharply. "Oh," he said, "you know him by sight, then? Does he belong to the neighborhood?" Now, it was not Mr. Cripps who had said he knew the murderer by sight, but the coroner. Far be it from him, thought the aspirant for fame, to contradict the coroner, and so balk himself of the credit thus thrust upon him. So he answered with the same cautious significance and a succession of portentous nods. "Your judgment, sir, is correct, quite correct. Come, then, this is important. You would be able to recognize him again, of course." There was no retreat. Mr. Cripps was in for it. It was an unforeseen consequence of the quibble, but since plunge he plunged neck and crop. "I'd know I am anywhere," he said triumphantly. There was an odd sound in the crowd behind, and a fall. Captain Nat strode across, and the crowd wondered, for Muskie Mag had fainted again. The landlord lifted her and carried her to the stairs. When the door had closed behind them, and the coroner's officer had shouted the little crowd into silence, the inquest took a short course to its end. Mr. Bland. Cripps, in the height of his consequence, began to feel serious misgivings as to the issue of his stumble beyond the verities, and the coroner's next words were a relief. "I think that will be enough, Mr. Cripps," the coroner said. "No doubt the police will be glad of your assistance." And with that he gave the jury the little summing up that the case needed. There was the medical evidence and the evidence of the stabbing, and that evidence pointed to an unmistakable conclusion. Nobody was in custody, nor had the murderer been positively identified, and such evidence as there was in this respect was for the consideration of the police. He thought the jury would have no difficulty in arriving at a verdict. The jury had none, and the verdict was murder by some person or persons unknown. The other inquest gave even less trouble. Mr. Henry Viney, shipowner, had seen the body and identified it as that of his partner, Louis Marr. Marr had suddenly disappeared a week ago, and an examination of his accounts showed serious defalcations, in consequence of which witness had filed his petition in bankruptcy. Whether or not Marr had taken money with him, witness could not say, as deceased had entire charge of the accounts, but it seemed more likely that embezzlement had been going on for some time past, and Marr had fled when detection could no longer be averted. This might account for his dressing and presumably seeking work as a sailor. The divisional surgeon of police had examined the body and found a large wound on the head, fully sufficient to have caused death, inflicted either by some heavy blunt instrument or by a fall from a height on a hard substance. One thigh was fractured, and there were other wounds and contusions, but these, as well as the broken thigh, were clearly caused after death. The blow on the head might have been caused by an accident on the riverside, or it might have been inflicted willfully by an assailant. Then there was the evidence of the man who had found the body foul of a rudder and a hawser, and of the police who had found nothing on the body. And there was no more evidence at all. The coroner, having sympathized deeply with Mr. Viney, gave the jury the proper lead, and the jury with perfect propriety returned the open verdict that the doctor's evidence and the coroner's lead suggested. The case, except for the circumstances of Marr's flight, was like 100 others inquired upon thereabout in the course of a few weeks, and in an hour it was in a fair way to be forgotten, even by the little crowd that clumped downstairs to try both cases all over again in the bar of the Hole in the Wall. To the coroner, the jury, and the little crowd, these were two inquests with nothing to connect them but the accident of time and the convenience of the Hole in the Wall clubroom. But Blind George, standing in the street with his fiddle and getting the news from the clubroom in scraps between song and patter, knew more and guessed better. Chapter 13, Stephen's Tale. I found it a busy morning at the Hole in the Wall, that of the two inquests. I perceived that, by some occult understanding, business in one department was suspended. The pale man idled without, and nobody came into the little compartment to exhibit valuables. Grandfather Nat had a deal to do in making ready the clubroom over the bar, and then in attending the inquests. And it turned out that Mrs. Grimes had settled on this day in particular to perform a vast number of extra feats of housewifery in the upper floors. Notwithstanding the disturbance of this additional work, Mrs. Grimes was most amazingly amiable, even to me, but she was so persistent in requiring first the key of one place, then of another, next of a chest of drawers, and again of a cupboard, that at last my grandfather distractedly gave her the whole bunch and told her not to bother him any more. The bunch held all she could require. Indeed, I think it comprised every key my grandfather had, except that of his cash box, and she went away with it amiable still, notwithstanding the hastiness of his expressions, so that I was amazed to find Mrs. Grimes so meek, and wondered vaguely and childishly if it were because she felt ill and expected to die shortly. Mr. Cripps was in the bar as soon as the doors were open, in a wonderful state of effervescence. He was to make a great figure at the inquest, it appeared, and the pride and glory of it kept him nervously on the strut, till the coroner came and Mr. Cripps mounted to the clubroom with the jury. He was got up for his part, as completely as circumstances would allow. Grease was in his hair, his hat stood at an angle, and his face exhibited an unfamiliar polish, occasioned by a towel. For my own part, I sat in the bar parlor and amused myself as I might. Blind George was singing in the street, and now and again I could hear the guffaw that signalized some sally that had touched his audience. Above, things were quiet enough for some while, and then my grandfather came heavily downstairs carrying a woman who had fainted. I had not noticed the woman among the people who went up, but now Grandfather Nat brought her through the bar and into the parlor, and as she lay on the floor just as the stabbed man had lain, I recognized her face also, for she was the coarse-faced woman who had stopped my grandfather near Blue Gate with vague and timid questions when we were on our way from the London dock. Grandfather Nat roared up the little staircase for Mrs. Grimes, and presently she descended, amiable still, till she saw the coarse woman, and was asked to help her. She looked on the woman with something of surprise and something of confusion, but carried it off at once with a toss of the head, a high phrase or so, likes of, respectable woman, and a quick retreat upstairs. I believe my grandfather would have brought her down again by main force, but the woman on the floor stirred and began scrambling up, even before she knew where she was. She held the shelf and looked dully about her, with a hoarse, "Beg pardon, sir, beg pardon." Then she went across toward the door, which stood ajar, stared stupidly with a look of some dawning alarm, and said again, "Beg pardon, sir, I been queer," and with that was gone into the passage. It was not long after her departure ere the business above was over, and the people came tramping and talking down into the bar, filling it close, and giving Joe the potman all the work he could do. The coroner came down by our private stairs into the bar parlor, ushered with great respect by my grandfather, and at his heels, taking occasion by a desperately extemporized conversation with Grandfather Nat, came Mr. Cripps. There had never been an inquest at the Hole in the Wall before, and my grandfather had been at some exercise of mind as to the proper entertainment of the coroner. He had decided, after consideration, that the gentleman could scarce be offended at the offer of a little lunch, and to that end he had made ready with a cold fowl and a bottle of claret, which Mrs. Grimes would presently be putting on the table. The coroner was not offended, but he would take no lunch. He was very pleasantly obliged by the invitation, but his lunch had been already ordered at some distance, and so he shook hands with Grandfather Nat and went his way. A circumstance that had no small effect on my history, for it seemed to Mr. Cripps, who saw the coroner go, that by dexterous management, the vacant place at our dinner table, for what the coroner would call lunch we called dinner, might fall to himself. It had happened once or twice before, on special occasions, that he had been allowed to share a meal with Captain Nat, and now that he was brushed and oiled for company, and had publicly distinguished himself at an inquest, he was persuaded that the occasion was special beyond precedent, and he set about to improve it with an assiduity and an innocent cunning that were very transparent indeed. So he was affectionately admiring with me, deferentially loquacious with my grandfather, and very friendly with Joe the potman and Mrs. Grimes. It was a busy morning, he observed, and he would be glad to do anything to help. At that time the houses on Wapping Wall were not encumbered with dustbins, since the river was found a more convenient receptacle for rubbish. Slops were flung out of a back window, and kitchen refuse went the same way, or was taken to the river stairs and turned out, either into the water or on the foreshore, as the tide might chance. Mrs. Grimes carried about with her in her dustings and sweepings an old coal scuttle, which held hearth bushes, shovels, ashes, cinders, potato peelings, and the like. And at the end of her work, when the brushes and shovels had been put away, she carried the coal scuttle, sometimes to the nearest window, but more often to the river stairs, and flung what remained into the Thames. Just as Mr. Cripps was at his busiest and politest, Mrs. Grimes appeared with the old coal scuttle, piled uncommonly high with ashes and dust and half-burned pipe lights. She set it down by the door, gave my grandfather his keys, and turned to prepare the table. Instantly, Mr. Cripps, watchful in service, pounced on the scuttle. "I'll pitch this air away for you, mum," he said, "while you're seen to Cap'n Kemp's dinner," and straightway started for the stairs. Mrs. Grimes's back was turned at the moment, and this gave Mr. Cripps the start of a yard or two. but she flung round and after him like a maniac, so that both Grandfather Nat and I stared in amazement. "Give me that scuttle," she cried, snatching at the hinder handle. "Mind your own business and leave my things alone." Mr. Cripps was amazed also, and he stuttered, I, Oni, drop it, you fool." The woman hissed, so suddenly savage that Mr. Cripps did drop it, with a start that sent him backward against a post, and the consequence was appalling. Mr. Cripps was carrying the coal scuttle by its top handle, and Mrs. Grimes, reaching after it, had seized that at the back, so that when Mr. Cripps let go, everything in the scuttle shot out on the paving stones. First, of course, the ashes and the pipe lights. Then, on the top of them, crowning the heap, Grandfather Nat's cash box. I suppose my grandfather must have recovered from his astonishment first, for the next thing I remember is that he had Mrs. Grimes back in the bar parlor, held fast by the arm, while he carried his cash box in the disengaged hand. Mr. Cripps followed, bewildered but curious, and my grandfather, pushing his prisoner into a far corner, turned and locked the door. Mrs. Grimes, who had been crimson, was now white, but more, it seemed to me, with fury than with fear. My grandfather took the key from his watchguard and opened the box, holding it where the contents were visible to none but himself. He gave no more than a quick glance within, and relocked it, from which I judged, and judged aright, that the pocketbook was safe. "There's witnesses enough here," said my grandfather, "for Joe, the potman, was now staring in from the bar, to give you a good dose, jail, mum, 'stead which I pay your full week's money and send you packin'." He pulled out some silver from his pocket. "Grateful or not, to me don't matter, but I hope you'll be honest where you go next, for your own sake." "Grateful! Honest!" Mrs. Grimes gasped, shaking with passion. I am talk! Honest! Take me to the station now, and bring that box and show 'em inside it. Go on!" I felt more than a little alarmed at this challenge, having regard to the history of the pocketbook, and I remembered the night when we first examined it, the creaking door, and the soft sounds on the stairs. But Grandfather Nat was wholly undisturbed. He counted over the money calmly, and pushed it across the little table. "There it is, Mum," he said, "and there's your bonnet and shawl in the corner. There's nothing else, yours in the place, I believe, so there's no need for you to go out, my sight till you go out of it altogether, that you'd better do quick. I'll lay the dinner myself." Mrs. Grimes swept up the money and began fixing her bonnet on her head and tying the strings under her chin, with savage jerks and a great play of elbow, her lips screwing nervously and her eyes blazing with spite. "Oh, yes," she broke out, though her rage was choking her as she snatched her shawl. "Oh, yes, a nice pussin', Cap'n Nat Kemp, to talk about honesty and gratefulness, a nice pussin'. A nice teacher for young master, 'opeful, I must say, and open, 'll do you credit. It ain't the last you'll see o' me, Captain Nat Kemp. Get out o' my way, you old lickspittle, Mr. Sight." Cripps got out of it with something like a bound, and Mrs. Grimes was gone with a flounce and a slam of the door. Scolded as she was, and furious as she was, I was conscious that something in my grandfather's scowl had kept her speech within bounds, and shortened her clamor. For few cared to face Captain Nat's anger, but with the slam of the door the scowl broke, and he laughed. "Come," he said, "that's well over, and I owe you a turn, Mr. Cripps, though you weren't intending it. Stop and have a bit of dinner, and if you'd like something on account to buy the board for the sign, or say 2 boards if you like, we'll see about it after dinner." It will be perceived that Grandfather Nat had no reason to regret the keeping of his cash box key on his watchguard, for had it been with the rest, in Mrs. Grimes's hands, she need never have troubled to smuggle out the box among the ashes, since the pocketbook was no such awkward article, and would have gone in her pocket. Mrs. Grimes had taken her best chance and failed. The disorders caused by the inquests had left her unobserved. The keys were in her hands, and the cash box was left in the cupboard upstairs. But the sedulous Mr. Cripps had been her destruction. As for that artist, he attained his dinner and a few shillings under the name of advance, and so was well pleased with his morning's work. Chapter 14. Stephen's Tale. A policeman brought my grandfather a bill, which was stuck against the bar window with gelatines, and just such another bill was posted on the wall at the head of hole-in-the-wall stairs, above the smaller bills that advertised the found bodies. This new bill was 6 times the size of those below. It was headed Murder in grim black capitals, and it set forth an offer of £50 reward for information which should lead to the apprehension of the murderer of Robert Kipps. The offer gave Grandfather Nat occasion for much solemn banter of Mr. Cripps, banter which seemed to cause Mr. Cripps a curious uneasiness, and time and again stopped his eloquence in full flood. He had been at the pains to cut from newspapers such reports of the inquest as were printed, and though they sadly disappointed him by their brevity, and all but 2 personally affronted him by disregarding his evidence and himself altogether, still he made great play with the exceptional 2 in the bar. But he was quick to drop the subject when Captain Nat urged him in pursuit of the reward. "Come," my grandfather would say, "you're neglecting your fortune, you know. There's £50 waitin' for you to pick up if you'd only go and collar that murderer. And you'd know him anywhere." Whereupon Mr. Cripps would look a little frightened and subside. I did not learn till later how the little painter's vanity had pushed him over bounds at the inquest, so far that he committed himself to an absolute recognition of the murderer. The fact alarmed him not a little on his return to calmness, and my grandfather, who understood his indiscretion as well as himself and enjoyed its consequences in his own grim way, amused himself at one vacant moment and another by setting Mr. Cripps's alarm astir again. "You're throwing away your luck," he would say, perhaps, "seein' you know him so well by sight. If you're too well off to bother about £50, give some of us poor uns a run for it, and put us on to him. I wish I'd been able to see him so clear." For in truth, Grandfather Nat well knew that nobody had had so near a chance of seeing the murderer's face as himself, and that Mr. Cripps, at the top of the passage, perhaps even round the corner, had no chance at all. It was because of Mr. Cripps's indiscretion, in fact, this I learned later still, that the police were put off the track of the real criminal. For after due reflection on the direful complications whereinto his lapse promised to fling him, that distinguished witness, as I have already hinted, fell into a sad funk. So, though he needs must hold to the tale that he knew the man by sight, and could recognize him again, he resolved that, come what might, he would identify nobody, and so keep clear of further entanglements. Now the police suspicions fell shrewdly on Dan Ogle, a notorious ruffian of the neighborhood. He had been much in company of the murdered man of late, and now was suddenly gone from his accustomed haunts. Moreover, there was the plain agitation of the woman he consorted with, Musky Mag, at the inquest. She had fainted indeed, when Mr. Cripps had been so positive about identifying the murderer. These things were nothing of evidence, it was true, for that they must depend on the witness who saw the fellow's face, knew him by sight, and could identify him. But when they came to this witness with their inquiries and suggestions, the thing went overboard at a breath. Was the assassin a tall man? Not at all, rather short, in fact. Was he a heavy-framed, bony fellow? On the contrary, he was fat rather than bony. Did Mr. Cripps ever happen to have seen a man called Dan Ogle? And was this man at all like him? Mr. Cripps had been familiar with Dan Ogle's appearance from his youth up. This was true, for the painter's acquaintance was wide and diverse. But the man who killed Bob Kipps was as unlike him as it was possible for any creature on 2 legs to be. Then, would Mr. Cripps, if the thing came to trial, swear that the man he saw was not Dan Ogle? Mr. Cripps was most fervently and desperately ready and anxious to swear that it was not, and could not by any possibility be Dan Ogle, or anybody like him. This brought the police inquiries to a fault. Even had their suspicions been stronger and better supported, it would have been useless to arrest Dan Ogle, supposing they could find him. For this, the sole possible witness to identity would swear him innocent. So they turned their inquiries to fresh quarters, looking among the waterside population across the river, since it was plain that the murderer had rode over for recent immigrants from Wapping. For a little while, Mr. Cripps was vexed and disquieted with invitations to go with a plain-clothes policeman and take a quiet look at some doubtful characters, but of course with no result, beyond the welcome one of an occasional free drink ordered as an excuse for waiting at bars and tavern corners. And in time these attentions ceased, for the police were reduced to waiting for evidence to turn up, and Mr. Cripps breathed freely once more. While Dan Ogle remained undisturbed, and justice was balked for a while, for it turned out in the end that when the police suspected Dan Ogle they were right, and when they went to other conjectures they were wrong. All this was ahead of my knowledge at the moment, however, as indeed it is somewhat ahead of my story, and for the while I did no more than wonder to see Mr. Cripps abashed at an encouragement to earn £50, for he seemed not a penny richer than before, and still impetrated odd coppers on account of the signboard of promise. Once or twice we saw Mr. Viney, and on each occasion he borrowed money off Grandfather Nat. The police were about the house a good deal at this time because of the murder, or I think he might have come oftener. The first time he came, I heard him telling my grandfather that he had got hold of Blind George, that Blind George had told him a good deal about the missing money, and that with his help he hoped for a chance of saving some of it. He added mysteriously that it had been nearer hereabouts than you might think at one time. A piece of news that my grandfather received with a proper appearance of surprise. But was it safe to confide in Blind George? Viney swore for answer, and said that the rascal had stipulated for such a handsome share that it would pay him to play square. On the last of these visits, I again overheard some scraps of their talk, and this time it was angrier. I judged that Viney wanted more money than my grandfather was disposed to give him. They were together in the back room where the boxes and bottles were, the room into which I had seen Bill Stagg's head and shoulders thrust by way of the trap door. My grandfather's voice was low, and from time to time he seemed to be begging Viney to lower his, so that I wondered to find Grandfather Nat so mild, since in the bar he never twice told a man to lower his voice, but if once were not enough, flung him into the street. And withal Viney paid no heed, but talked as he would, so that I could catch his phrases again and again. Let them hush as is afraid. I ain't, he said, and again, oh, am I? Not me. It's little enough for me if it does, not the rope anyway. And later, yes, the rope, Cap'n Kemp? As you know well enough, the rope at Newgate Jail, Dan Webb aboard the Florence. The Florence that was piled up on the little dingoes in broad day. As you was ordered, course, but that don't matter. That's what I want now, and no less. Think it lucky I offer to pay back when I get... Well, be sensible. I'm friendly enough. Very well. Presently my grandfather, blacker than common about brow and eyes, but a shade paler in the cheek, came into the bar parlor and opened the trade cash box. Not the one that Mrs. Grimes had hidden among the cinders, but a smaller one used for gold and silver. He counted out a number of sovereigns, 20, I believe, put the box away, and returned to the back room, and in a few minutes, with little more talk, Mr. Viney was gone. Grandfather Nat came into the bar parlor again, and his face cleared when he saw me, as it always would, no matter how he had been ruffled. He stood looking in my face for a little, but with the expression of one whose mind is engaged elsewhere. Then he rubbed his hand on my head and said abstracted Ly, and rather to himself, I fancied, than to me, "Never mind, Stevie, we got it back beforehand 40 times over." A remark that I thought over afterward in bed, with the reflection that 40 times 20 was 800. But Mr. Viney's talk in the back room brought most oddly into my mind, in a way hard to account for, the first question I put to my grandfather after my arrival at the hole in the wall. "Did you ever kill a man, Grandfather Nat?" Chapter 15. Stephen's Tale. The repeated multiplication of 20 by 40 sent me to sleep that night, and I woke with that arithmetical exercise still running in my head. A candle was alight in the room. Ours was one of several houses in Wapping Wall without gas, and I peeped sleepily over the bedclothes. Grandfather Nat was sitting with the cash box on his knees and the pocketbook open in his hand. He may just have been counting the notes over again or not, But now he was staring moodily at the photograph that lay with them. Once or twice he turned his eyes aside, and then back again to the picture, as though searching his memory for some old face. Then I thought he would toss it away as something valueless. But when his glance fell on the fireless grate, he returned the card to its place and locked the box. When the cash box was put away in the little cupboard at his bedhead, he came across and looked down at me. At first I shut my eyes but peeped. I found him looking on me with a troubled and thoughtful face, so that presently I sat up with a jump and asked him what he was thinking about. "Foxes sleep, Stevie," he said with his hand under my chin. "Well, boy, I was thinking about you. I was thinking it's a good job your father's coming home soon, Stevie, though I don't like parting with you." "Parting with me?" I did not understand. Wouldn't father be going away again soon? "Well, I don't know, Stevie, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot just lately, that's a fact. This place is good enough for me, but it ain't a good place to bring up a boy like you in. Not to make him the man I want you to be, Stevie. Somehow it didn't strike me that way at first, though it ought to done. It ought to done, seen, it struck strangers, and not particular moral strangers at that. He was thinking of Blind George and Mrs. Grimes, though at the moment I wondered if his talk with Mr. Viney had set him doubting. "No, Stevie," he resumed, "it ain't giving you a proper chance, keeping you here. You can't get lavender water out o' the bilge, and this part's the bilge of all London. I want you to be a better man than me, Stevie." I could not imagine anybody being a better man than Grandfather Nat, and the prospect of leaving him oppressed me dismally. And where was I to go? I remembered the terrible group of aunts at my mother's funeral, and a shadowy fear that I might be transferred to one of those virtuous females, perhaps to Aunt Martha, put a weight on my heart. "Don't send me away, Grandfa Nat," I pleaded, with something pulling at the corners of my mouth. "I haven't been a bad boy yet, have I?" He caught me up and sat me on his forearm, so that my face almost touched his, and I could see my little white reflection in his eyes. "You're the best boy in England, Stevie," he said, and kissed me affectionately. "The best boy in the world, and I wouldn't let go o' you for a minute but for your own good. But see now, Stevie, see, as to goin' away, now. You'll have to go to school, my boy, won't you? And the best school we can manage. A gentleman's school. Boardin' school, you know. Well, that'll mean goin' away, won't it? Anne, then it wouldn't do for you to go to a school like that. Not from here, you know, which you'll understand when you get there, among the others. My boy, Anne, your father's, has got to be as good a gentleman as any of 'em, Anne, not looked down on because, comin' from a whopping public like this, Anne, sent by a rough old chap like me. See? I thought very hard over this view of things, which was difficult to understand. Who should look down on me because of Grandfather Nat, of whom I was so fond and so proud? Grandfather Nat, who had sailed ships all over the world, had seen storms and icebergs and wrecks, and who was treated with so much deference by everybody who came to the hole in the wall. Then I thought again of the aunts at the funeral, and remembered how they had tilted their chins at him, and I wondered, with forebodings, if people at a boarding school were like those aunts. "So I've been thinking, Stevie. I've been thinking," my grandfather went on after a pause. "Now there's the wharf on the Cop. The work's gettin' more, and Grimes is gettin' older. But you don't know about the wharf. Grimes is the man that manages there for me. He's Mrs. Grimes's brother-in-law, and when his brother died, he recommended the widder to me, and that's how she came. And now she's gone, but that's neither here nor there. Years ago, Grimes himself and a boy was enough for all the work there was. Now there's 3 men regular, and work for more. The lime comes off the barges there for the new gasworks, and more every week. Now there's business there, and a respectable business. Too much for Grimes. And if your father'll take on a shore job, and it's a hard life, the sea, here it is. He can have a share, have the lot if he likes. For your sake, Stevie, and it'll build up into a good thing. Grimes'll be all right. We can always find a job for him. And you can go and live with your father somewhere respectable and convenient, not such a place as Wapping and not such people. And you can go to school from there, like any other young gentleman. We'll see about it when your father comes home." "But shan't I ever see you, Grandfa Nat?" "See me, my boy?" "Aye, that you will, if you don't grow too proud, that you will, Anne, great times will have, you, Anne, your father, Anne, me, all ashore together in the holidays, won't we? Anne, I'll take care of your own little fortune, the notes, till you're old enough to have it. I've been thinking about that too." Here he stood me on my bed and playfully pushed me back and forward by the shoulders. "I've been thinking about that, and if it was lyin' loose in the street, I'd be puzzled clean to say who'd really lost it, what with one thing and another. But it ain't in the street, Anne, it's yours, with no puzzle about it. But there, lie down, Stevie, and go to sleep. Your old grandfather's holdin', forth worse'n a parson, eh? Comes o' bein' a lonely man and havin' nobody to talk to, except myself, till you come. Lie down and don't bother yourself. We must wait till your father comes home. We'll keep watch for the Juno in the list. She ought to ha been reported at Barbados before this. And we must run down to Blackwall too, and see if there's any letters from him. So go to sleep now, Stevie. We'll settle it all. We'll settle it all when your father comes home." So I lay and dozed, with words to send me to sleep instead of figures, till they made a tune and seemed to dance to it. When father comes home, when father comes home, we'll settle it all, when father comes home. And presently, in some unaccountable way, Mr. Cripps came into the dance with his "Up to their riles, up to their riles, the Wessels is deep in, up to their riles." And so I fell asleep wholly. In the morning I was astir early, and watching the boats and the shipping from the bedroom window ere my grandfather had ceased his alarming snore. It was half an hour later, and Grandfather Nat was busy with his razor on the upper lip that my cheeks so well remembered, when we heard Joe the potman at the street door, whereat I took the keys and ran down to let him in, a feat which I accomplished by aid of a pair of steps, much tugging at heavy bolts, and a supreme wrench at the big key. Joe brought Lloyd's List in with him every morning from the early newsagents in Cable Street. I took the familiar journal at once, and dived into the midst of its quaint, narrow columns, crowded with italics, in hope of news from Barbados. For I wished to find for myself and run upstairs with a child's importance, to tell Grandfather Nat. But there was no news from Barbados. That is, there was no news of my father's ship. The name Barbados stood boldly enough, with reports below it, of arrivals and sailings, and one of an empty boat washed ashore, but that was all. So I sat where I was, content to wait, and to tell Grandfather Nat presently, offhand from over my paper like a politician in the bar, that there was no news. Thus, cutting the leaves with a table knife, my mind on my father's voyage, it occurred to me that I could not spell La Guaira, the name of the port his ship was last reported from, and I turned the paper to look for it. The name was there, with only one message attached, and while I was slowly conning the letters over for the third time, I was suddenly aware of a familiar word beneath the name of the Juno herself, and this was the notice that I read: La Guaira, September 1st. The Juno, brig of London, Beecher, from this for Barbados, foundered N of Margarita, total loss, all crew saved except first mate, master and crew landed Margarita. Chapter 16, Stephen's Tale. I cannot remember how I reached Grandfather Nat. I must have climbed the stairs, and I fancy I ran into him on the landing, but I only remember his grim face, oddly gray under the eyes, as he sat on his bed and took the paper in his hand. I do not know even what I said, and I doubt if I knew then. The only words present to my mind were, "All crew saved except first mate," and very likely that was what I said. My grandfather drew me between his knees, and I stood with his arm about me, and his bowed head against my cheek. I noticed bemusedly that with his hair fresh brushed, the line between the gray and the brown at the back was more distinct than common, and when there was a sudden clatter in the bar below, I wondered if Joe had smashed something, or if it were only a tumble of the pewters. So we were for a little, and then Grandfather Nat stood up with a sound between a sigh and a gulp, looking strangely askant at me, as though it surprised him to find I was not crying. For my part, one was dimly perplexed to see that neither was he, though the gray was still under his eyes, and his face seemed pinched and older. "Come, Stevie," he said, and his voice was like a groan. "We'll have the house shut again." I cannot remember that he spoke to me any more for an hour, except to ask if I would eat any breakfast, which I did with no great loss of appetite, though indeed I was trying very hard to think, hindered by an odd vacancy of mind that made a little machine of me. Breakfast done, my grandfather sent Joe for a cab to take us to Blackwall. I was a little surprised at the unaccustomed conveyance, and rather pleased. When we were ready to go, we found Mr. Cripps and 2 other regular frequenters of the bar waiting outside. I think Mr. Cripps meant to have come forward with some prepared condolence, but he stopped short when he saw my grandfather's face and stood back with the others. The four-wheeler was a wretched vehicle, reeking of strong tobacco and stale drink, for half the employment of such cabs as the neighborhood possessed was to carry drunken sailors, flush of money, who took bottles and pipes with them everywhere. Whether it was the jolting of the cab, Wapping streets were paved with cobbles that shook my faculties into place, whether it was the association of the cab and the journey to Blackwall that reminded me of my mother's funeral, or whether it was the mere lapse of a little time, I cannot tell. But as we went, the meaning of the morning's news grew on me, and I realized that my father was actually dead, drowned in the sea, and that I was wholly an orphan. And it struck me with a sense of self-reproach that the fact afflicted me no more than it did. When my mother and my little brother had died, I had cried myself sodden and faint, but now, heavy of heart as I was, I felt curiously ashamed that Grandfather Nat should see me tearless. True, I had seen very little of my father, but when he was at home, he was always as kind to me as Grandfather Nat himself, and led me about with him everywhere. And last voyage, he had brought me a little boomerang, and only laughed when I hove it through a window that cost him 3 shillings. Thus I pondered blinkingly in the cab, and I set down my calmness to the reflection that my mother would have him always with her now, and be all the happier in heaven for it, for she always cried when he went to sea. So at last we came in sight of the old quay, and had to wait till the bridge should swing behind a sea-beaten ship, with her bulwarks patched with white plank, and the salt crust thick on her spars. I could see across the lock the 3 little front windows of our house, shut close and dumb, and I could hear the quick chanty from the quay where the capstan turned. Oh, I served my time on the Blackball line. Hurrah for the Blackball line. From the South Sea north to the 69, hurrah for the Blackball line. And somehow with that I cried at last. The ship passed in, the bridge shut, and the foul old cab rattled till it stopped before the well-remembered door. The house had been closed since my mother was buried, Grandfather Nat paying the rent and keeping the key on my father's behalf, and now the door opened with a protesting creak and a shudder, and the air within was close and musty. There were 2 letters on the mat where they had fallen from the letter flap, and both were from my father, as was plain from the writing. We carried them into the little parlor, where last we had sat with a funeral party, and my grandfather lifted the blind and flung open the window. Then he sat and put 1 letter on each knee. "Stevie," he said, and again his voice was like a groan. "Look at them postmarks. Ain't one Belize?" Yes, one was Belize, the other La Guaira, and both from my mother. "Ah, one's been lyin' here, the other must come yesterday, by the same mail as brought the news." He took the 2 letters again, turned them over and over, and shook his head. Then he replaced them on his knees and rested his fists on his thighs, just above where they lay. "I don't know as we ought to open 'em, Stevie," he said wearily. "I don't know, Stevie. I don't know." He turned each over once more and shut his fists again. "I don't know. I don't know. Man and wife, between themselves, wouldn't do it, living." "Stevie boy, we'll take 'em home and burn 'em." But to me the suggestion seemed incomprehensible, even shocking. I could see no reason for burning my father's last message home. "Perhaps there's a little letter for me, Grandfather Nat," I said. "He used to put one in sometimes. Can't we look? And Mother used to read me her letters too." My grandfather sat back and rubbed his hand up through his hair behind, as he would often do when in perplexity. At last he said, Well, it's hard to tell. We should never know what we'd burnt if we did. We'll look, Stevie. And I'll read no further than I need. Come, the Belize letters first. Send I ain't doin' wrong, that's all." He tore open the cover and pulled out the sheets of flimsy foreign notepaper, holding them to the light almost at arm's length, as long-sighted men do. And as he read, slowly as always, with a leathery forefinger following the line, the gray under the old man's eyes grew wet at last, and wetter. What the letter said is no matter here. There was talk of me in it, and talk of my little brother, or sister, as it might have been for all my father could know. And again there was the same talk in the second letter, the one from La Guaira. But in this latter another letter was enclosed, larger than that from my mother, which was, in fact, uncommonly short. And here, where the dead spoke to the dead no more but to the living, was matter that disturbed my grandfather more than all the rest. The enclosure was not for me, as I had hoped, but for Grandfather Nat himself. And it was not a simple loose sheet folded in with the rest, but a letter in its own smaller envelope, close shut down with the words, Cap'n, Kemp on the face. My grandfather read the first few lines with increasing agitation, and then called me to the window. "See here, Stevie," he said. "It's wrote small, to get it in, and I'm slow with it. Read it out quick as you can." And so I read the letter, which I keep still, worn at the folds and corners by the old man's pocket, where he carried it afterward. "Dear Father, just a few lines private, hoping they find you well. This is my hardest trip yet, and the queerest, and I write in case anything happens and I don't see you again. This is for yourself, you understand, and I have made it all cheerful to the missus, especially as she is still off her health, no doubt. Father, the Juno was not meant to come home this trip, and if ever she rounds Blackwall Point again, it will be in spite of the skipper. He had his first try long enough back on the voyage out, and it was then she was meant to go, for she was worse found than ever I saw a ship, even a ship of Viney's, and not provisioned for more than half the run-out, proper rations. And I say it plain, and will say it as plain to anybody, that the vessel would have been piled up or dropped under, and the insurance paid months before you get this, if I had not pretty nigh mutinied more than once. He said he would have me in irons, but he shan't have the chance if I can help it. You know, Beecher. 4 times I reckon he has tried to pile her up, every time in the best weather and near a safe port, foreign. The men would have backed me right through, some of them did, but they deserted one after another all round the coast, Montevideo, Rio, and Bahia, and small blame to them, and we filled up with half-breeds and such. The last of the 10 and the boy went at Bahia, so that now I have no witness but the second mate, and he is either in it or a fool. I think a fool, but perhaps both. Not a man to back me. Else I might have tried to report or something at Belize, though that is a thing best avoided, of course. No doubt he has got his orders, so I am not to blame him, perhaps. But I have got no orders, not to lose the ship, I mean, and so I am doing my duty. Twice I have come up and took the helm from him, but that was with the English crew aboard. He has been quiet lately, and perhaps he has given the job up. At any rate, I expect he won't try to pile her up again, more likely a quiet turn below with a big auger. He is still mighty particular about the longboat being all right, and the falls clear, etc. If he does it, I have a notion it may be some time when I have turned in. I can't keep awake all watches. And he knows I am about the only man aboard who won't sign whatever he likes before a consul. You know what I mean. And you know Beecher, too. Don't tell the missus, of course. Say this letter is about a new birth or what not. No doubt it is all right, but it came in my head to drop you a line, on the off chance, and a precious long line I have made of it. So no more at present from your affectionate son Nathaniel. P.S. I am in half a mind to go ashore at Barbados and report, but perhaps best not. That sort of thing don't do. While I read, my grandfather had been sitting with his head between his hands, and his eyes directed to the floor so that I could not see his face. So he remained for a little while after I had finished, while I stood in troubled wonder. Then he looked up, his face stern and hard beyond the common, and his was a stern face at best. "Stevie," he said, "do you know what that means, that you've been a reddin'?" I looked from his face to the letter and back again. "It means, I think the skipper sank the ship on purpose. It means murder, my boy, that's what it means. Murder, by the law of England, feloniously castin', away in, destroyin'. That's what they call the one thing, though I'm no lawyer man. And it means prison, though why, when a man follows orders faithful, I can't say, but well I know it. And if any man loses his life, thereby, it's murder, whether accidental or not. Murder and the rope by the law of England, and bitter well I know that too. Oh, bitter well I know it." He passed his palm over his forehead and eyes, and for a moment was silent. Then he struck the palm on his knee and broke forth afresh. "Murder, by the law of England, even if no more than accident in God's truth, how much the more than this here, when the one man as won't stand and see it done goes down in his berth. Oh, I've known that afore, too, with a gimlet through the door frame, and I know Beecher. But orders is orders, and it's them as gives them as is to reckon with. I've took orders myself. Lord, and I've none but a child to talk to, a little child. But you're no fool, Stevie. See here now, and remember. You know what's come to your father? He's killed, willful, murdered, like what they hang people for, at Newgate, Stevie, by the law. And do you know who's done it?" I was distressed and bewildered, as well as alarmed by the old man's vehemence. "The captain," I said, whimpering again. "Viney," my grandfather shouted. Henry Viney, as I might have, served the same way, and I wish I had. Viney and Mars done it, and Mars paid for it already. Lord, he went on with his face down in his hands and his elbows on his knees. Lord, I see a lot of it now. It was what they made out. Oh, the insurance that was to save the firm, and when my boy put in Anne, stopped it all the voyage out, and more, they could hold on no longer, but plotted to get out with what they could lay hold of. Lord, it's plain as print. Stevie. He lowered his hands and looked up. Stevie, that money's more yours now than ever. If I ever had a doubt, if it don't belong to the orphan they've made. But there, it sent you, boy. Sent you, and anyone. I'd believe in Providence after that. In a moment more he was back at his earlier excitement. But it's Viney's done it, he said, with his fist extended before him. Remember, Stevie, when you grow up, it's Viney's done it, and it's murder, by the law of England. Viney has killed your father, and if it was brought against him, it 'ud be murder. Then, I said, we'll go to the police station, and they will catch him. My grandfather's hand dropped. Ah, Stevie. He groaned. You don't know. It ain't enough for that, and if it was, I can't. Not with you to look after. I might do it, and risk all, if it wasn't for that. My God, it's a judgment on me. A cruel judgment. My own son, and just the same way. I can't, Stevie, not with you to take care of. Stevie, I must keep myself safe for your sake, and I can't raise a hand to punish Viney. I can't, Stevie, I can't, for I'm a guilty man myself by the law of England, and Viney knows it, though it wasn't willful, as God's my judge. Grandfather Nat ended with a groan, and sat still with his head bowed in his hands. Again I remembered, and now with something of awe, My innocent question, "Did you ever kill a man, Grandfather Nat?" Still he sat motionless and silent, till I could endure it no longer, for in some way I felt frightened, so I went timidly and put my arm about his neck. I fancied, though I was not sure, that I could feel a tremble from his shoulders, but he was silent still. Nevertheless, I was oddly comforted by the contact, and presently, like a dog anxious for notice, ventured to stroke the gray hair. Soon then he dropped his hands and spoke. "I shouldn't ha," said it Stevie, "but I'm all shooken, worried Ann. I talked wild. It was no need to say it, but there ain't a soul alive to speak to else, and somehow I talk, as it might be half to myself. But you know what about things I say? Private things, don't you? Remember?" He sat erect again, and raised a forefinger warningly, even sternly. "Remember, Stevie, but come. There's things to do. Give me the letter. We'll get together any little things to be KEP, papers N, what not, N, take 'em home. And I'll have to think about the rest. What's best to be done? Sell 'em or what? But I don't know. Chapter 17 in Blue Gate. In her den at the black stair-top in Blue Gate, Musky Mag lurked, furtive and trembling, after the inquests at the hole in the wall. Where Dan Ogle might be hiding she could not guess, and she was torn between 100 fears and perplexities. Dan had been seen and could be identified. Of that she was convinced, and more than convinced, since she had heard Mr. Cripps's testimony. Moreover, she well remembered at what point in her own evidence the police inspector had handed the note to the coroner, and she was not too stupid to guess the meaning of that. How could she warn Dan? How help or screen him? How put to act that simple fidelity that was the sole virtue remaining in her, all the greater for the loss of the rest? She had no money. On the other hand, she was confident that Dan must have with him the whole pocketbook full of notes which had cost 2 lives already, and now seemed like to cost the life she would so gladly buy with her own, for they had not been found on Kipps's body, nor in any way spoken of at the inquest. But then he might fear to change them. He could scarcely carry a single one to the receivers who knew him, for his haunts would be watched. More, a reward was offered, and no receiver would be above making an extra £50 on the transaction. For to her tortured mind it seemed every moment more certain that the cry was up, and not the police alone, but everybody else was on the watch to give the gallows its due. She was uneasy at having no message. Doubtless he needed her help, as he had needed it so often before. Doubtless he would come forward if he could, but that would be to put his head in the noose. How could she reach him and give it? Even if she had known where he lay, to go to him would be to lead the police after her, for she had no doubt that her own movements would be watched. She knew that the boat wherein he had escaped had been found on the opposite side of the river, and she, like others, judged from that he might be lurking in some of the waterside rookeries of the south bank, the more as it was the commonest device of those wanted in Ratcliffe or Wapping to go for a change to Rotherhithe or Bankside, and for those in a like predicament on the southern shores to come north in the same way. But again, to go in search of him were but to share with the police whatever luck might attend the quest. So that Musky Mag feared alike to stay at home and to go abroad, longed to find Dan, and feared it as much, wished to aid him, yet equally dreaded that he should come to her, or that she should go to him. And there was nothing to do, therefore, but to wait and listen anxiously, to listen for voices or footsteps, even for creaks on the stairs, for a whistle without that might be a signal, for an uproar or a sudden hush that might announce the coming of the police into Blue Gate, even for a whisper or a scratching at door or window wherewith the fugitive might approach, fearful lest the police were there before him. But at evening, when the place grew dark, and the thickest of the gloom drew together to make a monstrous shadow on the floor where once she had fallen over something in the dark, then she went and sat on the stairhead, watching and dozing and waking in terror. So went a day and a night, and another day. The corners of the room grew dusk again, and with the afternoon's late light, the table flung its shadow on that same place on the floor, so that she went and moved it toward the wall. As she set it down, she started and crouched, for now at last there was a step on the stair, an unfamiliar step, a woman's it would seem, and stealthy. Musky Mag held by the table and waited. The step ceased at the landing, and there was a pause. Then, with no warning knock, the door was pushed open, and a head was thrust in, covered by an old plaid shawl. A glance about the room, and the rest of the figure followed, closing the door behind it, and the shawl being flung back from over the bonnet, there stood Mrs. Grimes, rusty and bony, slack-faced and sour. Mrs. Grimes screwed her red nose at the woman before her, jerked up her crushed bonnet, and plucked her rusty skirt across her knees with the proper virtuous twitch. Then said Mrs. Grimes, "Where's my brother Dan?" For a moment Musky Mag disbelieved eyes and ears together. The visit itself, even more than the question, amazed and bewildered her. She had been prepared for any visitor but this. For Mrs. Grimes's relationship to Dan Ogle was a thing that exemplary lady made as close a secret as she could, as in truth was very natural. She valued herself on her respectability. She was the widow of a decent lighterman, of a decent lightering and wharf-working family, and she called herself housekeeper, though she might be scarce more than charwoman, at the hole in the wall. She had never acknowledged her lawless brother, when she could in any way avoid it, and she had, indeed, bargained that he should not come near her place of employment, lest he compromise her. And so far from seeking him out in his lodgings, she even had a way of failing to see him in the street. What should she want in Bluegate at such a time as this, asking thus urgently for her brother Dan? What but the reward? For an instant Mag's fears revived with a jump, though even as it came she put away the fancy that such might be the design of any sister, however respectable. "Where's my brother Dan?" repeated Mrs. Grimes abruptly. I don't know, Mum," faltered Mag, husky and dull. "I ain't seen I.M. for some time." "Oh, nonsense." "I am particular. I got something to tell. I am important. If you won't say where E is, go and find I.M. "I wish I could, Mum, truly, but I can't." "Do you mean E's left you?" Mrs. Grimes bridled high and helped it with a haughty sniff. "No, Mum, not quite. In your way of speakin', I think, Mum, but E's just gone away for a bit." "Ho! In trouble again, you mean, eh?" "Oh, no, Mum, not there," Mag answered readily, for, with her, trouble was merely a genteel name for jail. "Not there, not for a long while." "Where then?" "That's what I dunno, Mum, not at all." Mrs. Grimes tightened her lips and glared. Plainly she believed none of these denials. "Perhaps E's wanted," she snapped. "An' keepin' out-o' the way just now, is that it?" This was what no torture would have made Mag acknowledge. But, with all her vehemence of denial, her discomposure was plain to see. "No, Mum, not that," she declared pleadingly. "Really E ain't, Mum. Really E ain't, not that." "Pooh!" exclaimed Mrs. Grimes, seating herself with a flop. "That's a lie, plain enough. E's layin' up somewhere, and you know it. What harm d'ye suppose I'm goin' to do I am? E ain't robbed me, leastways not lately. I got a job for. I tell you, money in is pocket. If you won't tell me, go and tell I am. Go on, and I'll wait." "It's God's truth, Mum. I don't know where E is," Mag protested earnestly. "Ark! There's someone on the stairs. They'll 'ear. Go away, Mum, do. I'll try and find I am and tell I am. S'help me, I will. Go away, they're comin'." In truth, the footsteps had reached the stair-top, and now, with a thump, the door was thrust open, and Blind George appeared, his fiddle under his arm, his stick sweeping before him, and his white eye rolling at the ceiling. "Hello," he sung out. "Lady visitors, Or is it only one? 'Tain't polite to tell the lady to go away, Mag." "Good afternoon, Mum, good afternoon." He nodded and grinned at upper vacancy, as one might at a descending angel. Mrs. Grimes, meanwhile, close at his elbow, preparing to get away as soon as he was clear past her. For blind George's keenness of hearing was well known, and she had no mind he should guess her identity. "Good afternoon, Mum," the blind man repeated. "Havin' tea?" He advanced another step and extended his stick. "What?" he added, suddenly turning. "What? Table gone? What's this? Doin' a guy? Clearin'? Out?" "No, George," Mag answered. "I only moved the table over to the wall. 'Ere it is. Come in. Feel it." She made a quick gesture over his shoulder, and Mrs. Grimes hurried out on tiptoe, but at the first movement blind George turned sharply. "There she goes," he said, making for the door. "She don't like me. Timid little darlin'. Hello, my dear," he roared down the stairs. "Hello, you never give me a kiss. I know you." "Won't you say goodbye?" He waited a moment, listening intently, but Mrs. Grimes scuttled into the passage below without a word, and instantly blind George supplemented his endearments with a burst of foul abuse, and listened again. This expedient succeeded no better than the first, and Mrs. Grimes was gone without a sound that might betray her identity. Blind George shut the door. "Who was that?" he asked. "Oh, nobody particular," Mag answered with an assumption of indifference. "Only a woman I know. Name O, Jane. What do you want?" "Ah, now you're come to it." Blind George put his fiddle and bow on the table and groped for a chair. "First," he went on, "is there anybody else's can 'ere, eh? Cracks or crannies or peepholes, eh? 'Cause I come as a pal, to talk private business, I do. It's all right, George. Nobody can hear. What is it?" "Why," said the blind man, catching her tight by the arm and leaning forward to whisper. "It's Dan. That's what it is. It's Dan." She was conscious of a catching of the breath and a thump of the heart, and blind George knew it too, for he felt it through the arm. "It's Dan," he repeated. "So now you know if it's what you'd like listened to." "Go on," she said. Well, first thing, all bein' snug, 'ere's 5 bob, catch-hold." He slid his right hand down to her wrist, and with his left pressed the money into hers. "All right, don't be frightened of it. It won't 'urt ye. Lord, I bet Dan 'ud do the same for me if I wanted it, though. He is a bit rough sometimes. I ain't rich, but I got a few bob by me. And if a pal ain't too, avenue who is, eh? Who is?" He grinned under the white eye, so ghastly a counterfeit of friendly goodwill that the woman shrank and pulled at the wrist he held. "Lord love ye," he went on, holding tight to the wrist. "I ain't the bloke to round on a pal as is under a cloud. See what I might be done if I'd be wanted? I might, gone and let out all sorts o' things, as you know very well yourself, at the inquest, both the inquests. But did I? Not me, not a bit of it. That ain't my way. No, I lay low, and said nothing. What arter that? Why, there's 50 quid reward offered, 50 quid, a fortune to a poor bloke like me. And all I got to do is to go and say, Dan Ogle, to earn it. Them 2 words and, no more. Ain't that the truth? Here, ain't that the truth? He tugged at her wrist to extort an answer, and the woman's face was drawn with fear. But she made a shift to say, with elaborate carelessness, "Reward? What reward, George? I dunno nothin' about it." "G-R-R," he growled, pushing the wrist back, but gripping it still. "That ain't ensom. Not to a pal it ain't. Not to a faithful pal as comes to do 'ee a good turn. You know all about it well enough, and you needn't think as I don't know too. Blind, ain't I? Blind from a kid, but not a fool. You ought to know that, by this time. Not a fool. Look, with another jerk at the woman's arm. "Look, the last time I was in this room there was me and you and Dan Aid. 2 men as is dead now, and post-mortaled, and Chuckses, inquested and buried, wasn't there? Well, Dan chucked me out. I ain't barren, no malice for that, mind ye. Ain't I just give ye 5 bob, and ain't I come to do ye a turn? I was chucked out, but ye don't suppose I dunno what happened arter I was gone, do ye, eh? The room was grown darker, and though the table was moved, the shadow on the floor took its old place, and took its old shape, and grew. But it was no more abhorrent than the shadowy face with its sightless white eye close before hers, and the hand that held her wrist, and by it seemed to feel the pulse of her very mind. She struggled to her feet. "Let go my wrist," she said. "I'll light a candle. You can go on." "Don't light no candle on my account," he said, chuckling, as he let her hand drop. "It's a thing I never treat myself to. There's parties as is afraid. Oh, the dark. They tell me. I'm used to it." She lit the candle, and set it where it lighted best the place of the shadow. Then she returned and stood by the chair she had been sitting in. "Go on," she said again. "What's this good turn you want to do me?" "Ah," he replied, "that's the pint." He caught her wrist again with a sudden snatch, and drew her forward. "Sit down, my gal, sit down, and I'll tell you comfortable. What was I a-sayin'?" "Oh, what? 'Appened arter I was gone." "Yes. Well, that there visitor was flimped clean as a whistle. But first—" "Eh?" "First." Blind George snapped his jaws, and made a quick blow in the air with his stick. "Eh? Eh? Ah, well, never mind. But now I'll tell you what the job fetched. 800 and odd quid in a leather pocketbook, and a silver watch." "Eh? I thought that would make ye jump. Blind, ain't I? Blind from a kid, but not a fool." "Well now," he proceeded, "so far all right. If I can tell ye that, I can pretty well tell ye all the rest, can't I? All about Bob Kip's going off to sell the notes, and Dan watchin', I am bein' suspicious, and catchin', I am makin' a bolt for the river, and, eh?" He raised the stick in his left hand again, but now point forward, with a little stab toward her breast. "Eh? Eh? Like that, eh? All right. Don't be frightened. I'm a pal, I am. It served that cove. Right, I say. Playin' a trick on a pal. I don't play a trick on a pal. I come here to do. I meant a good turn. I do. Don't I? Well, Dan got away, and good luck too. IME got away, clear over the river, with the 800 quid in the leather pocketbook. On, now easily, low on snug, on more good luck too. I am, says I, bein' a pal. Ain't that right? Mag shuffled uneasily. Go on, she said. If you think you know such a lot, you ain't come to that good turn yet that you talk so much about. Right. Now I'll come to it. Now you know I know as much as anybody. More'n anybody, 'cept Dan. Perhaps a bit more'n what you know yourself. An IKEP, it quiet when I might. A, made my fortune out of it. KEP, it quiet. Bein' a faithful pal. An bein' a faithful pal. An all I come, with 5 bob for ye. Bein' all I can afford. 'Cause I know you're a bit short, though Dan's got plenty. Got a fortune. Why should you be short, and Dan got a fortune? Only 'cause you want a pal as you can trust, like me. That's all. Can't come to you, 'cause showin' is self. You can't go to, I am, 'cause of being watched and follered. So I come to do ye both a good turn goin', between, one to another. Where is Mag was in some way reassured. She feared and distrusted Blind George, and she was confounded to learn how much he knew, but at least he was still ignorant of the essential thing. So she said, knowin' so much more'n me, I wonder you dunno that too. Anyhow, I don't. What? You dunno? Dunno where he is? No, I don't, no more'n you. Oh, that's all right for anybody else, but not for a pal like me. Not for a pal as is doin', a good turn. Besides, it ain't you awny, it's I am. Owl, get on with the stuff. Won't be able to change it, and he'll be as short as you, and perhaps get smugged with it on, I am. That 'ud never do, and I can get it changed. What part o' Rotherhithe is it, eh? I can easy find, I am. Is it Dockhead? There, or anywhere, for all I know. I tell you, George, I don't know no more'n you. Let go my arm. Go on. But he gave it another pull, an angry one. What? What? He cried. If Dan knowed as you was keepin' is O.L., pal George from doin', I am a good turn. What? Ud, it do, eh? He'd give it you, my beauty, wouldn't-a? Eh? Eh? He twisted the arm, ground his teeth, and raised his stick menacingly. But this was a little too much. He was a man, and stronger, but at any rate he was blind. She rose and struggled to twist her arm from his grasp. If you don't put down that stick, George, she said, if you don't put it down and let go my arm, I'll give it you same as Bob Kipps got it. Sold me I will. I'll give you the chive. I will. Don't you make me to spree. He let go the wrist and laughed. Whoa, beauty, he cried. Don't make a rumpus with a faithful pal. If you won't tell me, I suppose you won't, bein' a woman, whether it's bad for Dan or not, eh? I tell you I can't, George. I swear solemn I don't know no more'n you. Perhaps not so much. He ain't been near nor sent nor nothin' since then. That's gospel truth. If I do, ear from I am, well then I'll see. Will ye tell I am then? Ear, tell I am this. Tell I am he mustn't go tryin' to sell them notes, or he'll be smugged. Tell I am I can put I am in the way o, gettin' money for ardquids, and plenty on 'em. Tell I am that, will ye? Tell I am I'm a faithful pal, and nobody can do it but me. I know things you don't know about, nor I am neither. Tell I am tonight. Will ye tell I am tonight? How can I tell I am tonight? I'll tell I am right enough when I see I am. I s'pose you want to make your bit out of it, pal, or not. There you are, he answered quickly. There you are. If you won't believe in a pal, look at that. If I make a fair deal, man to man, with them notes and get money for, instead o' smuggin', quids instead o' quod, I'll avenue my proper reglars, won't I? And proper reglars on all that, paid square, 'ud be more'n I could make playin', the snitch, if Dan'll be open to reason. See? You won't forget, eh? He took her arm again eagerly, above the elbow. Know what to say, don't you? Best for all of us. Ye mustn't show them notes to a soul, till ye sees me. I'm a pal. I got the little tip, 'ow to do it proper. See? Now you know. Gimme my fiddle. 'Ere we are. Where's the door? All right. Don't forget. Blind George clumped down the black stair, and so reached the street of Blue Gate. At the door he paused, listening till he was satisfied of Musky Mag's movements above. Then he walked a few yards along the dark street and stopped. From a black archway across the street, a man came skulking out and over the roadway to Blind George's side. It was Viney. Well, he asked eagerly, what's your luck? Blind George swore vehemently, but quietly. Precious little, he answered. She don't know where he is. I thought at first it was Kid, but it ain't. She ain't and she don't know. I couldn't catch hold o' the other woman, and she got away and never spoke. You see, again when she came out, didn't you? Know not me. She kept her shawl tighter about her head than ever. And if she hadn't, it ain't likely I'd know her. What now? Stand watch again? I'm sick of it. So am I, but it's for good pay if it comes off. 5 minutes might do it. You get back and wait in case I tip the whistle." Viney crept growling back to his arch, and Blind George went and listened at Mag's front door for a few moments more. Then he turned into the one next it and there waited, invisible, listening still. 5 minutes went and did not do it, and 10 minutes went, and 5 times 10. Blue Gate lay darkling in evening, and foul shadows moved about it. From one den and another came a drawl and a yelp of drunken singing. A fog from the river dulled the lights at the highway end and slowly crept up the narrow way. It was near an hour since Viney and Blind George had parted, when there grew visible, coming through the mist from the highway, the uncertain figure of a stranger, drifting dubiously from door to door, staring in at one after another, and wandering out toward the gutter to peer ahead in the gloom. Blind George could hear, as well as another could see, that here was a stranger in doubt, seeking somebody, or some house. Soon the man, middle-sized, elderly, a trifle bent, and all dusty with lime, came and turned to the door where he stood, and at once Blind George stepped full against him with an exclamation and many excuses. "Beg pardon, governor. Poor blind chap. 'Ope I didn't 'urt ye. Was he wantin' anybody in this 'ouse?" The limey man looked ahead, and reckoned the few remaining doors to the end of Blue Gate. "Well," he said, "I fancy it's air or next door. D'ye know a woman the name Mag Flynn? I'm your bloke, governor. Know her?" "Rather." "Up air. I'll show ye." "Lord love ye, she's an old friend mine. Come on. I should say you'd be in the lime trade, governor, wouldn't you? I smelt it pretty strong, and I'll never forget the smell lime. Why, says you? Why, 'cause losin' my blessed sight with lime, when I was a innocent kid. Fell on a slakin'. Bed, governor, in. Blinded me blessed self, so I won't forget the smell lime easy. Ain't you in the trade now? Ain't I right?" He stopped midway on the stairs to repeat the question. "Ain't I right? Is it your own business or a firm?" Well, I do avenue to do with lime a good bit," said the stranger evasively. "But go on, or else let me come past." Blind George turned, and reaching the landing, thumped his stick on the door and pushed it open. "'Ere y'are," he sang out. "'Ere's a gentleman come to see ye, as I found showed the way too. Lord love ye, he'd never found ye if it wasn't for me. But I'm a old pal, ain't I? A faithful old pal." He swung his stick till he found a chair, and straightway sat in it, like an invited guest. "Lord love ye, yes," he continued, rolling his eye and putting his fiddle across his knees. The oldest pals she's got, or I am either." The newcomer looked in a puzzled way from Blind George to the woman, and back again. "It's private business I come about," he said shortly. "All right, governor," shouted Blind George heartily. "Out with it. We're all pals, old pals." "You ain't my old pal, anyhow," the limey man observed. "An', if the room's yours, we'll go and talk somewheres else." "Get out, George, go along," said Mag with some asperity but more anxiety. "You clear out. Go on." "Oh, all right, if you're goin' to be unsociable," said the fiddler, rising. "Damn, I don't want to stay." "Not me. I was only doin' the friendly, that's all. Bein' a old pal. But I'm off all right. I'm off. So long." He hugged his fiddle once more and clumped down into the street. He tapped with his stick till he struck the curb and then crossed the muddy roadway, while Viney emerged again from the dark arch to meet him. "All right," said Blind George, whispering huskily. "It's business now, I think. Business. You come on now. You'll avenue to foller 'em if they come out together. If they don't, well, you must look arter the one as does." Chapter 18, On the Cop. When the limey man left Blue Gate, he went first to the hole in the wall, there to make to Captain Kemp some small report on the wharf by the Leah. This did not keep him long, and soon he was on his journey home to the wharf itself, by way of the crooked lanes and the commercial road. He had left Blue Gate an hour and more when Musky Mag emerged from her black stairway, peering fearfully about the street ere she ventured her foot over the step. So she stood for a few seconds, and then, as one chancing a great risk, stepped boldly on the pavement, and, turning her back to the highway, walked toward Back Lane. This was the nearer end of Blue Gate, and, the corner turned, she stopped short and peeped back. Satisfied that she had no follower, she crossed Back Lane, and taking every corner, as she came to it, with a like precaution, threaded the maze of small, ill-lighted streets that lay in the angle between the great rope walk and commercial road. This wide road she crossed, and then entered the dark streets beyond, in rear of the George Tavern. And so, keeping to obscure parallel ways, sometimes emerging into the glare of the main road, more commonly slinking in its darker purlieus, but never out of touch with it, she traveled east, following in the main the later course of the Limey Man, who had left Blue Gate by its opposite end. The fog that had dulled the lights in Ratcliffe Highway met her again near Limehouse Basin, but ere she reached the church, she was clear of it once more. Beyond, the shops grew few, and the lights fewer. For a little while decent houses lined the way, the houses of those last merchants who had no shame to live near the docks and the works that brought their money. At last, amid a cluster of taverns and shops that were all for the sea and them that lived on it, the East India Dock gates stood dim and tall, flanked by vast raking walls, so that one might suppose a Chinese city to seethe within. And away to the left, the dark road that the wall overshadowed was lined on the other side by hedge and ditch, with meadows and fields beyond that were now no more than a vast murky gulf, so that no stranger peering over the hedge could have guessed aright if he looked on land or on water or on mere black vacancy. Here the woman made a last twist, turning down a side street and coming to a moment's stand in an archway. This done, she passed through the arch into a path before a row of ill-kept cottages, and so gained the marshy field behind the accident hospital, the beginning of the waste called the Cop. Here the great blackness was before her and about her, and she stumbled and labored on the invisible ground, groping for pits and ditches, and standing breathless again and again to listen. The way was so hard as to seem longer than it was, and in the darkness she must needs surmount obstacles that in daylight she would have turned. Often a ditch barred her way, and when, after long search, a means of crossing was found, it was commonly a plank to be traversed on hands and knees. There were stagnant pools, too, into which she walked more than once, and twice she suffered a greater shock of terror, first at a scurry of rats, and later at quick footsteps following in the sodden turf, the footsteps, after all, of nothing more terrible than a horse of inquiring disposition, out at grass. So she went for what seemed miles, though there was little more than half a mile in a line from where she had left the lights, to where at last she came upon a rough road, seamed with deep ruts, and made visible by many whitish blotches where lime had fallen, and had there been ground into the surface. To the left this road stretched away toward the lights of Bromley and Bow Common, and to the right it rose by an easy slope over the river wall skirting the Leah, and there ended at Kemp's Wharf. Not a creature was on the road, and no sound came from the black space behind her. With a breath of relief she set foot on the firmer ground, and hurried up the slope. From the top of the bank she could see Kemp's Wharf just below, with two dusty lighters moored in the dull river, and beyond the river the measureless dim Abbey Marsh. Nearer, among the sheds, a dog barked angrily at the sound of strange feet. A bright light came from the window of the little house that made office and dwelling for the wharf-keeper, and something less of the same light from the open door, for there the Limey Man stood waiting, leaning on the doorpost and smoking his pipe. He grunted a greeting as Mag came down the bank. "Bit late," he said, "but it ain't easy over the Cop for a stranger." "Where?" the woman whispered eagerly. Where is he?" The limey man took 3 silent pulls at his pipe. Then he took it from his mouth with some deliberation and said, "Remember what I said? I don't want. I am heir. I don't know what. E's done, and don't want. But if E likes to come idin' about, I ain't goin' to play the informer. I don't know why I should promise as much as that, just 'cause my brother married his sister. She ain't done me no credit, from what I 'ear now. Though she, at a good master, as I can swear, 'cause E's mine too." "Where is he?" was all Mag's answer, again in an anxious whisper. "Understand?" the limey man went on. "I'm 'bout done with the pair on 'em now, but I ain't goin' to inform. E come ere a day or 2 back an," claimed Shelter, "an', seein' as I was goin' up to Wappin tonight, E wanted me to tell you where E was. Well, I've done that, an' I ain't goin' to do no more, see? E ain't none o' mine, an' I won't avenue part nor parcel with, I am, nor any of ye. I keep myself decent, I do. I shan't say is, an' I shan't say E ain't, and the sooner E goes the better, it'll please me, see?" "Yes, Mr. Grimes, sir, but tell me where he is." The limey man took his pipe from his mouth and pointed with a comprehensive sweep of the stem at the sheds round about. "You can go and look in any o' them places as ain't locked," he said offhandedly. "The dog's chained up. Try the end one first." Grimes the wharfinger resumed his pipe, and Mag scuffled off to where the light from the window fell on the white angle of a small wooden shelter. The place was dark within, dusted about with lime, and its doors stood inward. She stopped and peered. "All right," growled Dan Ogle from the midst of the dark. "Can't ye see me now, yai? Avenue come?" And he thrust his thin face and big shoulders out through the opening. "Oh, Dan!" the woman cried, putting out her hands as though she would take him by the neck, but feared repulse. "Oh, Dan! Thank God you're safe, Dan. I've been dying, oh fear for you, Dan." "Grrr," he snorted. "Stow that. What I want's money. Got any?"